He's been called the last American hero, and in many ways, the biography of Junior Johnson is larger than life. Born in Wilkes County in 1931, Johnson burst onto the racing scene 18 years later, finishing second in a preliminary contest at North Wilkesboro. By that time, Johnson was a veteran whiskey runner, hauling moonshine across the South on an almost daily basis. After outdriving federal agents on dark and treacherous roads, racing on sanctioned tracks was easy. Johnson scored 50 checkered flags as a driver, including victories at Daytona, Charlotte, and Atlanta, and turned a number 3 Chevrolet into a state treasure. In 1966, he left the driver's seat and became a team owner. He managed some of NASCAR's greatest drivers over 3 decades and won 3 Winston Cup championships. He left NASCAR in 1995, returning to his farm to raise 2 children with his wife Lisa. Since then, Johnson has launched a legal moonshine business and a new NASCAR team, with his son Robert behind the wheel. Fearless on and off the track, Johnson is a man devoted to his family and mindful of his legacy. Tonight, a Wilkes County childhood, stashing moonshine, outrunning the law, and the dawn of a NASCAR career.
This program is made possible by a grant from the A.J. Fletcher Foundation as part of its ongoing commitment to the Biographical Conversations series. The North Carolina-based foundation supports social justice, public broadcasting, education, the arts, and human services throughout North Carolina. And the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Time I was 15 or something, so I was hauling whiskey all over Winston-Salem, Charlotte, High Point, Greensboro. I had a lot of good opportunities to drive fast cars, good cars, and I knew I could make a lot of money driving them cars. I was tough on a car. I ran a car for every inch of endurance or whatever out of. People tell me how fortunate I was or how good I was or whatever. And my comment to that most of the time, I've been a person that the good Lord gave 9 lives to.
Hello and welcome to the first in our series of biographical conversations with Junior Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Mr. Johnson, thanks so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to start by talking about your parents. So tell us about Robert Glenn and Laura Bell Johnson.
I've never seen a father or mother that cared about people like my dad and mom did. And they was, at the time that I was, real young and just barely could remember, there was more of our kin people live with us than there was the family, of the 3 girls and 3 boys that my other father had. And it was so many of, like my mother's brothers and sisters' children stayed with us because they didn't have food and stuff to eat with, and sometimes we didn't even have room to sleep in our own bed. There'd be 4 or 5 kids in the same bed and stuff of that nature. But my dad was okay with that. He would help anybody or do anything for anybody if they tried to do something for themselves. And mother the same way. She would cook for, sometimes there'd be 15, 20 people sitting at our table, and she was cooking for them.
Your father was a moonshiner, but before we talk about the moonshine business, he also raised crops in livestock, and he also ran a sawmill. When you were young, did you help your dad with the crops and the livestock and even the sawmill business?
I did logging for his sawmill business. I'd go to school, and quick as I'd get out of school, I'd take off to home and log with a mule. We had a mule called Kate, and we would drag in logs till dark, and then he could saw, the next day till we got out of school, and we'd do the same thing again for him. And it was one of the things that he always was good at was organizing stuff and having things in the right place at the right time. And just hard-working person and dedicated to whatever he's doing.
What were your earliest memories of moonshine? And when you were a young boy, did you realize that moonshine was illegal?
No, I didn't. I thought my dad was, doing it as, to make money, but not, I didn't know it was illegal because I was only about 5 or 6 years old when they busted him with a big bunch of whiskey that he had. And the revenuers was taking all the whiskey out of the house and setting it out in the yard door where they could bust it and stuff. And it was so much that we couldn't hardly sleep with our beds because it was packed in the house so much. We had to climb all over it and stuff to get in bed at night. And I remember that they was sliding it down the steps from upstairs on some boards. They put some boards and they just bring it and put it on that board and slide it to the bottom of the steps and carry it outside. And me and my brother, we got to riding them cases down that steps. We thought that was the funniest thing we ever seen. We'd ride down, run back up, and ride down again. And one of the revenuers told us that you get out of here and quit riding that stuff down, aggravating us and all. And I never will forget my brother says, "Now this is our house. It ain't your house. You get out of here yourself." But it was something that you basically, a young kid would think that's what you do and never think about it was illegal.
When you were 4 years old, federal agents came to your house and found 7,254 cases of moonshine in your home. Do you remember the raid, and how were you able to get so much moonshine into your house?
Well, we had a 2-story house and a basement also, and moonshine was basically at that particular time was in 6-gallon cases, and he just kept putting it in and packing it, in the open spaces till he had the whole house plumb full of whiskey. That's the memory that I had of it, and whenever the revenuers pretty well know the good people and the bad people in the moonshine business and stuff. They didn't handcuff my dad and take him to jail or nothing. They just let him roam around the house there and stuff till they got ready to bust all the whiskey up, and then they would take him and put him under bond and stuff. But my dad was a little bit of a concern that my mother was not in the right form of shape to take care of us, because he figured with that he's probably going to get 3 or 4 years or more, and he did. He got 5 years. And he walked off, and he dodged them for about 5 months, I believe. Then he went in and gave up. But he had put my mother in financial shape to where she was going to be okay as long as he's gone.
Is it true that your home was raided so many times by federal agents that sometimes your mother would serve them coffee and pie?
True. That's true. She, although they was doing us harm, she didn't, that was just the kind of person my dad and mom was.
Your father was arrested a number of times. According to our research, he spent 20 of his 63 years in prison. What was it like for you as a young boy to see your father arrested?
We knew that the buck of the work and stuff was going to fall on us to do. And as we got older, we picked up the slack in when he was gone.
You have often said that your father was the smartest person you've ever known. What values did your father teach to you and your brothers and sisters?
Do unto others and not worry about them doing into you. Don't hold a grudge. And help somebody if you can. That's it. That was one thing about him that sometimes I didn't understand when somebody do something to him. And he would forget it and go on. I didn't understand that for a long, long time. But my wife now says the same thing about me. If I can't help somebody, I'll just leave them alone.
Around the age of 7 years old, you became interested in mechanics. Do you remember a story that involved you and a Briggs & Stratton engine on a lawnmower?
Yeah, he had a lawnmower and it wouldn't run, and I was going to fix it, so I took it all apart. And he come in, he got on me a little bit about it. He said, "Now, you think you're so smart, you're going to put that thing back together." I had a rat smart of a problem getting it back together, I'll tell you that. But I know there's a whooping coming if I didn't get it back together, so I worked on it about, I'd go to school and then I'd come home and work on that thing till dark, and then I'd try to figure out how I was going to get it back together when I go to school the next day. But, that's, I guess, how you learn. You all the time doing something that you ain't supposed to be doing when you're 7 years old.
What was it about machines that interested you at this young age?
I don't know, but I took a great interest in motors and how they worked, the malfunction of them, and I just never could leave them alone. It's just a thing that intrigued me, that something that would crank up and run and, do that kind of stuff. But I think down the road it helped me a lot in my racing business. Once I learned it, I couldn't get enough of it. And that's what got me into racing. And fast cars. I had to have fast cars to outrun the revenues. And that lawnmower probably helped my career more than I really thought it did. Because when I got done with it, I could do about anything.
According to our research, you dropped out of school after the 8th grade. What were your school days like?
Uh, so. You know, I went to school and, you know, I learned a lot in school, but I thought I was smart enough to take care of myself. And I felt like when I was in the 8th grade that I wasn't going to get no more out of school. I need to go on my own and do what I could make more money and go forward myself. So I just didn't like school. I didn't felt like I learned a lot in school. And a lot of kids at that day and time would bail out of school if they could. But I don't know if I'd have been better to go on to school and got a good education. At that particular time, I don't know what I would have done if I'd have got a college education, you know. But I did know what I was going to do when I quit. I was going to make money, and I was pretty successful at that.
Once you finished with school, you started hauling moonshine. Were you making moonshine as well at this time?
I was. I took the kind of route that my dad took. I would get 2 people to make the whiskey, and we'd be thirders, and I furnished all the money. They'd do all the work, and I'd furnish all the money. And sometimes I'd have 4 or 5 stills going at one time. And I needed the whiskey to haul, so I had 2 ways of making money off the whiskey. Everybody else had 1 way, and I was on the easy side. They was on the tough side because it was hard work to make whiskey. I never worked any harder in my life than I did a still place making whiskey. But it was a good learning for me to be able to finance and do the business that I did in my 15, 16 years. Oh, I was on my way as one of the biggest bootleggers in the country. But nobody knew it except me.
By the time you were 14, you were already driving. When did you first learn to drive, and what are some of your earliest memories of driving?
Well, my earliest memories was, driving my dad's old truck on the farm, running around. To get out of his sight, I'd spin around and do all kinds of stuff. But when I got on the road, we lived back in Ingham Holler, and the main road was about a mile from where we lived. And the asphalt road, I'd drive on dirt to the asphalt road, and I'd turn around and drive back to the house. And when I could, my dad would let me, I'd drive his car. He had a 39 Ford, a 2-door. He was hauling whiskey in itself. And I'd run it as hard as I could, and sometimes I'd about slide out my seat and all that kind of stuff, and just kept playing with it. And as time come along, I got better and better at it, and I got where I could outrun my 2 brothers. And my dad, he seen that I was going to, be a good a good liquor hauler. So he started letting me haul whiskey in a short run, like 10 mile down the road and back. And, like midnight or something of that nature. And he'd follow me to make sure that something didn't happen to me and all. But it just he kept, doing it and doing it. And after a while, time I was 15 or something, so I was hauling whiskey all over Winston-Salem, Charlotte, High Point, Greensboro, just everywhere that he delivered whiskey to. And as time went along, and he sort of quit hauling whiskey and let me haul it, and my two brothers. And I got into the business myself, and I was hauling in the late 40s. I was hauling whiskey everywhere by myself, and had people working for me making whiskey and stuff.
We've talked about what it takes to make moonshine. Tell us about the distribution system, and did you and your family have a large network of people that you were distributing the moonshine to?
They did, and I did too. You do that in a sort of a manner of forming a kind of a network of this guy wants 20, 30 cases of whiskey every Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. And you set up your network on, if you're going to haul to this guy, you need another guy to haul to right close by. And based on the fact if you get run off from this guy, you can go to that guy and set off your whiskey. And you don't have to bring it back home. And the bootlegging ring was sort of like you might say the mafia ring or something of that nature, because you knew everybody that had the ability to supply what you needed. And if it was trustworthy, you'd deal with him. If you didn't, you'd research whether they was a man of their word or not, or you wouldn't touch them. So, and I was a good judge of character. I never lost a bit of money from the people I worked with. I always paid them, and they paid me. And I had a good organization going, and 90% of the time, or towards the end, I was not in position to be caught doing anything.
When you were hauling moonshine, how much of the moonshine could you get into your car, and where'd you stash it?
Behind the driver's seat, and you could put 5 cases where the passenger seat was at. You put it in the floorboard and then stack it in the seat, and you could put 5 cases right there beside it. And you needed to do that because one of the cases sat right against your hip here so that you didn't slide out from under the seat. If you got run, you needed to stay on the steering wheel. They didn't have seat belts back then. And you'd put, about 14 cases behind the seat. You'd take the bottom part of the seat out of the car and leave the other seat in it. And then you'd put 6 or 8 cases in the trunk, and 40 Fords would haul 22 cases and be down below the glasses about 6 inches to where you couldn't see it if you was going down the road.
As your distribution network grew, how many miles were you driving each night, and how much were you hauling at that time?
Well, I drive, from dusk till daylight. And a lot of times I'd be so far from home, I wouldn't get home till 12 or 1 o'clock in the day. But it wasn't nothing strange for me to take off to Biloxi, Mississippi. I'll just use that.
We understand that you were never caught on the roads during your moonshining business. Did you have any close calls?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And you'll do that when you're going into places, they block the road on you. And the way they block the road on you, they'll pull two cars, head to head. And then when you go by a certain point, they'll bring two cars out on the road, come down the road side by side, and come in behind you. And they got you, like on a bridge or something of that nature. But I'd never go in on the bridge. I'd come back to the two that was coming down the road side by side, and then it come a deal of chicken. And they'd always give. They didn't have the nerve to confront you. They'd get over. And of course, I've run up on the bank to dodge them many times. But sometimes you'll lose a car from going up through a ditch or something, or you break a wheel down or something. But I only lost one car in that environment, and it broke a wheel down.
What is a bootleg turn, and how often did you use that?
Often, very often. It's you come down, the law jumps you as quick as you can get out of their sight. You do the bootleg turn. You slow the car down with the gears, and you just keep gearing it down. And when you get it to low gear, you just punch the brakes and drop off to the side and mash it wide open until it's spin around and right back up the road you go. And you have to practice it. If you miss it, you might, dive in the ditch or something of that nature. And you can do it very easy if you practice it.
Is it true that you used to carry, on some occasions, a red light and a siren with you? And if so, how would you use those items?
Well, you do the same thing to them as they do to you. If you got run and you knew you was in a place where that they was going to be able to block you, and that got out real quick, but it didn't get out to everybody. It just got out in one area where you'd used it sometime or another. But I got saved about 5 or 6 times by using the red light and the siren.
So when you put those on, the other law enforcement officials thought you were working on their side.
That's right. That's right.
Your biography, Brave in Life, states that you made life kind of miserable for one specific North Carolina highway patrolman named Sid Carter. Tell us about him and any stories that you have with him.
Well, Sid was a great guy, but, he was probably one of the first highway patrolmen, if it was on the highway patrol side, because he had an old Buick. And, that was a way back, and I was young, and I had them 44s with the V8 motors in them, and them souped up and everything. And I'd find out where he was sitting on the side of the road somewhere trying to catch somebody speeding or something like that. And I'd go hunt him up and play with him, get him after me and just run fast enough to stay in front of him so he'd think he's about to catch me and all that kind of stuff. And then I'd run off and leave him, and then come back and meet him and blow the horn and stuff like that with him. I had a lot of fun with him, but you know how young boys will do something like that. And he finally got where he knew who it was. And I stopped messing with him because, You know, he's the only highway patrolman we had in Wilkes County, you know. He was pointed, and if you need him, he might not come if he knew what you was doing to him.
Were there any lessons that you learned from your moonshine business that you were able to use later in life?
Yeah, you know, you learn a lot about people and what they, you can almost, in the whiskey business, after you quit it, you can almost walk up to a man and the first word he speaks to you, you can tell whether he's honest or dishonest. And it's a lot of help when you're doing business now. You know how to do business in the side of gambling. You know how to do business honest. You can almost pick a person that's honest. It's hit me a lot in life when I started racing and getting out of the whiskey business and stuff like that, doing business with people. Now I can almost pinpoint a guy. All I have to do is talk to about 5 or 10 minutes.
You first raced in the early summer of 1949. Tell us how you came to be racing that day at the North Wilkesboro Speedway.
My brother, he had, this is when he was kind of the top of the family with hauling whiskey and stuff of that nature. And he had a real fast car, probably the fastest car there was around in that community at that time. And we'd been running up and down from the house to the highway back and forth, and I could outrun him up and down through there. And I'd drive my dad's car, and I could outrun him pretty easy back down to the road and back. And he was up at the racetrack, and they announced that they was going to let the bootleggers run a 25 or 30 lap race amongst the bootleggers. And they announced it in time because they'd qualify at 1 o'clock and they'd race at 3. So there's a big intermission in there. Nobody had anything to watch or do or anything like that. So that's when they came up with the idea to let the bootleggers entertain the spectators during that time. And they told when they was going to run it, and my brother, he figured, well, I'll run down and get Junior and drive my car, and he had time to do that. And I was plowing my daddy's corn down in the bottom below the house with a mule, and I was barefooted. And most young boys, 14, 15 years old at that time, went barefooted all the time. So he came down there and he said, come on, I want you to drive my car. And I said, well, what do you want me to drive for? And he said, well, there's a race at Wilkesboro, and I want to put my car in it and let you drive it. I said, well, let me tie this mule to a fence post over here, and I'll get in the car with you. You got to stop at the house and get my shoes. So got in the car and went to the house, got the shoes, and took off to Wilkesboro. And I got in the car, and me and Gwen Staley, which was another bootlegger, I was running behind him, and I had run him down and caught him because I started way in the back. And I was going to win the race, and there was a boy running real slow. And when I pulled out to pass him, I almost hit him and dodged him. And by the time I got done hitting the brakes and all that stuff, Gwen got a little start on me. And he won the race, and I run second. But that was my first adventure in racing.
You did finish second in that
Right.
race. What was that experience like for you to be in the car and racing on a track?
Well, you didn't really know what it was or how to take it, but it bothered me that I run second.
How did the experience of racing on a track compare with what you had experienced when you were racing the back roads hauling whiskey?
It was about 1/3 faster because you was going one way and what you was used to on the road because you was going both ways on the road. Whiskey haulers, they knew how to go to left and right. But when they had to pick it up 30 miles an hour or something in that manner to go one way, they just said, no, that car won't go in there already. And they never could make themselves do it.
Let's talk about the beginnings of NASCAR. It all got started in 1947 when Big Bill France organized a meeting of drivers and owners at a hotel in Daytona Beach. At this time, what had you heard about the National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing?
Well, I remember Bill France came and spent a lot of time in North Wilkesboro with Enoch Staley, Gwen Staley, John Maston, Doe Powell, Jim Foster, Joe Foster, just Nolly Love. Every one of the people that I've named over was in the whiskey business. And he married a lady in West Jefferson. And he had a reason to be in Wilkes County at that time because coming to Wilkesboro, he met his wife and they got married and he had a tie to come back. And he was at the racetrack out at Wilkesboro when they was building it. And he found out that the people in Wilkes County, a lot of the people had a lot of money. And he basically started his racing foundation right in Wilkes County because they met over in an old hotel, and that's the first time that anybody ever seen the logo of NASCAR. He drawed it on a piece of paper and showed all of them what NASCAR was gonna, how the logo was gonna look and all that stuff, and formed the papers right there to run North Wilkesboro with, give them the right to call it NASCAR. And he run a race down at Charlotte, and that was the first race they ever run in NASCAR, was at Charlotte with stock cars. And from that point on, NASCAR was tied to North Wilkesboro, and it stayed there till Enoch got out of it. He passed away and they sold it.
At this time, how intent were you on becoming a full-time professional race car driver? And was that something that you felt was in reach?
It was in my reach, and I was dead serious about getting it. And I quit the liquor business and went after that and didn't go after nothing else. I was dead serious because I had a good sponsor behind me. I had a good mechanics and had a good car, and I was going to make it on my own.
The Darlington Raceway at this time was considered the toughest track in NASCAR since it had been built in 1950. What made this speedway so tough?
Well, it was narrow and banked, and that was basically the biggest reason it was so tough. The narrowness was the most trouble because two cars couldn't get in there together. If it did, there's going to be riding on each side of them. And it was a long track and fast. And for that reason, 500 mile there was, it was a man killer plus a car tear you up. Cars, they just couldn't hardly make them stay together that long because they didn't have beefed up parts and stuff of that like, and the motors would blow up, and they'd very rarely have many cars for a long time that would even finish the race. And most of the ones that finished it had took care of his car all day long and nursed it along, and the guys that went out and run fast as they could run had blowed their motors or blowed a tire and hit the wall and stuff like that. I run a car for every inch of endurance or whatever out of it, because I just never liked to baby the thing or save it or, stroke or whatever you call it. I went to go to the front, lead it till I either blew up or got the checkered flag. That was my mentality. And it lived to be pretty costly to me, because until they got where they could make the cars live at that, kind of driving, I lost a lot of races that I could have won if I'd have took care of my car.
You notched your first NASCAR victory at the Hickory Speedway. What was that victory like for you?
Well, that was my home track. I'd run the Hickory. Me and Ralph Earnhardt and Ed Jarrett and stuff, and all of us that growed up at that place. And I just felt like it, if I could drive it in one car, I could drive it in another car. And I went after it, and sure enough, I led most of the thing and won it. And I went on later to win it 2 or 3 more times with a NASCAR. But it was such a small track, they finally moved away from it. But I was better at it than the cars that people brought in and come in, because I'd run it so much. I knew every inch of that place, so when I was asked to drive it, I knew I had a good chance of winning.
You had a really strong rookie season in 1955 with starting 36 races, scoring 5 victories, and beating some of the top drivers that year. Who were some of the other drivers that you were competing with during these early years?
Well, Buck Bucker, Herb Thomas, Speedy Thompson, Joe Wesley, just many of the old drivers, Farball Roberts, Jack Smith, Cotton Owens, Gober Sosby, Bob and Fonnie Flock, Tim Flock, just on and on and on. The best race drivers ever come down through the pike I was running against, and I didn't have no experience. I just drove a car as hard as it'd run and beat them. But I wasn't supposed to beat them. It's odds I was not going to win a race, but I did.
The following year, in 1956, you were arrested by Joe Carter of the Federal Alcohol Unit. Tell us about that day in June of 1956 and what happened.
Well, that's when I, went off to prison. You know, my dad had that still, and I came in from Oxford, Pennsylvania, where I just won a race that night, and got there about the time that he needed to fire up his still. And he had overslept and asked me to go in and fire it up for him, and I did, and that's when they had it staked out, and they, run me away from the still, and there's so many of them, they just hemmed me up and caught me.
In November 1956, you were sentenced to 2 years in federal prison at Chillicothe, Ohio. Were you surprised by this sentence, and did you have any concerns with going to prison?
I didn't think he'd surely send me because he had a record of letting people out on probation the first time, and especially a young person. And but he was dead set on sending me to prison because of who I was and who my daddy was, and politics, I think, worked in it a lot. And he just did an unjust thing because I didn't have nothing to do with that still. And he knew it. All of them knew it. It was an unjust sentence and unfair.
You ended up serving 11 months and 3 days at the Chillicothe prison. What were your days in prison like?
Well, I didn't have no bad days. I worked out on the farm, and I had a lot of the boss man that I was under kind of gave me a free rope to do what I seen it need to be done, and I worked several other guys that was on the farm and learned them how to drive tractors and worked on the tractors and stuff like that. And they had a dairy and a big pig farm, and they had about 1,800 acres that they raised crops on to take care of the cows and the hogs. And there was Army, Navy, or whatever, a military hospital close by the Chillicothe prison, and a lot of the stuff they did at the prison camp they furnished to the hospital and stuff of that nature. So I'd go out at 6 and come in at 6, and I'd take a bath and go to bed. Get up the next morning at 6 and go through the chow line, and back on the farm I'd be. So I only slept in prison. I didn't have any daytime in it other than Sunday. But and sometimes I'd be on the farm on Sunday, but not hard time, not a bad time. It's just confinement.
What then were your immediate plans once you were paroled?
I didn't have plans to go back into the liquor business. But when I got out, I didn't go into the racing either right quick. I went back into the liquor business and stayed in it till 1960. And I got out of it and went back to racing again full time. Because I was out of it, and he sent me to prison for something that I didn't deserve to go to prison. So I said, well, I want to just go back into it and get back what he took away from me. That's what I did.
You missed the 1957 NASCAR season. Did you have any thoughts in 1958 of going back to driving?
Oh, I knew I was going to go back to driving, but I was going to get back in the liquor business too. So I did. I drive on Sunday and haul liquor on Monday.
How easy was it to get back into the whiskey business?
Easy. I just picked up where I left off.
So the networks were still there?
Right.
Tragedy struck on September 21st of 1958 when you were involved with a car accident. Tell us about that day.
Down towards Plymouth, North Carolina, from the directions that I'd cut off through a shortcut back in the country somewhere or another. It's going to come out way down below Raleigh. And I had been up the night before, and evidently I fell asleep and run across the main highway and hit a girl in a car, and well, there's 3 cars involved in it, but one of the cars had a lady in it that got killed. And it was, you know, we went to the hospital. Me and her rode in the same ambulance from the wreck to the hospital. And she was still alive when we got to the hospital, but died very shortly thereafter. And the family was, you know, a great family and stuff. And you know, it was an accident on my part of the thing, and it was a case where an innocent person was killed in a car that my doings, you know. And we worked out, you know, the system to where everybody was pleased with the thing, but it was you know, a sad thing. You know, I think about it very often, even today. You know, innocent person that was my doings, and not intentionally, but unintentionally. You know, I should not have been going, you know, I should have stopped and went to bed and slept some or another, you know. But it's a sad thing. That's just one thing you couldn't do anything about.
According to our research, you quit the moonshine business around 1960. Why did you make that decision?
Well, I'd got over my anger of them sending me to jail. Racing got pretty profitable, and I had a lot of good opportunities to drive fast cars and good cars, and I knew I could make a lot of money driving them cars if I stayed with it, and that's what I did. I made the decision to quit hampering around and being aggravated with the law and go on and, you know, drive a race car and get away from that kind of stuff.
Do you have any regrets about the time you spent in the moonshine business?
No, wouldn't take nothing for it. Had a great experience of, you know, beating the game and making money. And one of my good careers was in the moonshine business. I brag a lot about it, that I did better at it than anybody else did.
something you're proud of.
Yes.
And we'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you again for sharing all of your time and your experiences with us.
It's my privilege. Thank you for having me.
And we'll pick it back up where we left off in the next of our series of biographical conversations with Junior Johnson. For more information on this series, please go to our website, www.unctv.org/biocon. Thanks for joining us.
This program is made possible by a grant from the A.J. Fletcher Foundation as part of its ongoing commitment to the Biographical Conversations series. The North Carolina-based foundation supports social justice, public broadcasting, education, the arts, and human services throughout North Carolina. And the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNCTV.